And the first time we've been out of the office. That's how good this coming out of the lockdown is. And we're here at the Bill Leak Gallery in Ettalong on the Central Coast, newly opened, a tribute to a great cartoonist who we all miss very much. We'll be talking to Bill's biographer, Fred Paul, later on about the project he's on, his mission to complete this book by next March in time for the 3rd anniversary of Bill's death. And we'll be, apart from that, there's plenty else to talk about. We'll be talking about cancel culture, something Bill knew all about. Cancel culture is a new word for what Bill suffered for much of his last few years. We'll be crossing to Queensland, to Townsville, to talk to Phil Thompson, the MP, about how this ridiculous overreaction by the Palaszczuk government is really hurting the tourism industry up there. We'll also be hearing from Amanda Stoker, Senator Amanda Stoker in Brisbane. We'll be talking to her about how things are going in Brisbane, but also about this cancel culture, which I suppose is really the big theme for tonight. But first, before we get into all that, I must go over and thank our host for having us here, Johannes. How are you, Johannes Leak?
Good, Nick.
Mate, good to see you. And we love your work. And this is tomorrow's cartoon, is it? You're just working on here.
Indeed. This is tomorrow's cartoon. That's right. I've just been putting the final touches on. I think the last thing I've got to do is sign
Beautiful.
it.
Don't forget to sign it.
That's right.
And then press the send button.
Yeah, that's right. Save it and send it.
This is a beauty. Daniel Andrews must be giving you a lot of material right now.
It's, well, just when you think things couldn't get any sillier in Victoria, they do. It's just been one colossal fiasco after another. So that's manna from heaven for cartoonists, of course.
And the cat. If the cat fits, wear it, right?
Absolutely. I mean, I did a cartoon not long ago which had the whole of Victoria just sort of coming off its moorings and floating off towards China. So
we need to go the full Mao suit next time.
That's right, exactly.
Look, we'll be coming back to you later because I want you to show us around the gallery and tell us about the history of it. But sure. First, let's talk about a couple of other issues. The lockdown. We'll be publishing a report very shortly on this, in which we're saying that this whole lockdown thing is going on a bit too long. that we need to get the economy back up and running, and a place where that really needs to start happening, I guess, is in the tourism industry. And so to Queensland, to far north Queensland, to Townsville. Phil Thompson, the MP for Herbert. Phil, it's great to have you on Watercooler Live and your first appearance. Welcome. Phil?
Yes.
Hi, Phil. Welcome.
Hi, Nick. Thank you for having me.
Phil, you're up there in Townsville right now. What's the atmosphere like?
Mate, businesses are doing it tough. People are hurting up here. Our tourism industry is screaming out for the borders to be open and to get people travelling up. It's a tough time.
We want to come up. Believe me, we all want to come up. It's getting turned a bit cold down here. But look, we're just approaching, I think, the first week of the school holidays, right? Normally at this time, the place would be booming, wouldn't it?
Exactly. And, I want you to come up. Unless you're from Victoria, then I want you to stay there. But everyone else, we want you to come up. We want you to see our beautiful city. But there's ways that we should be doing it. And I've always advocated for regional management zones. We've been well over 70 days without a new case of COVID-19 in Townsville. I believe that Townsville should be running at full capacity, but we're not treated that way. We're treated by the Premier like the southeast corner, which is a shame because, we can get back to business here, but we can't do that. And while I want everyone to come up and visit, if you still can only have small numbers in a hotel or in a pub or at a restaurant, then what's the point? Because, us as locals, we like to go out and enjoy these things as well. So, we want the borders to open, but we want to ease the restrictions here in the north.
Yeah, look, believe me, as soon as the borders open, Townsville will be the first place I'm heading to. But Phil, this is just, we feel this has just got ridiculous now. Obviously, we have to take careful steps early on, right? I mean, nobody's arguing that when the thing was at its height, when we had all sorts of cases breaking out, of course we had to take action. But right now, I mean, Queensland, no cases of community transmission, I think, for several weeks. Same in New South Wales. And yet, if I drove up to the border, I'll be confronted by border police. I'll have to have a visa to get into Queensland. I mean, how ridiculous.
If we look at what Palaszczuk, the Labor Premier, is doing, is continuing with the fear, continuing with the crisis, well past what the medical advice has been. And that's because they're going into an election. And we know that, people don't change leadership during a crisis. So if people are continue to believe the rubbish thrown down their throat by the Labor Premier to go into election, that's what she wants, because she's already stacking it in her favour anyway. But this is another way to do it. In Townsville, 70 plus days, it's ridiculous. Without any positive cases, we have businesses screaming out for help, screaming out with support. We saw today, 7 minutes since Queensland released its small business grants, 7 minutes, and the website crashed like it did the first time. So, they've dropped the ball here.
Well, tell me, walking around Townsville and that part of the world, if you go into a hotel, for instance, I mean, people must be pretty, down about the whole thing. I mean, they can see their businesses crashing, everything. People, are they holding up?
We go through cyclones, droughts, floods only 12 months ago, and now coronavirus. We've been doing it tough for quite a while, and businesses have been hurting for as long as pretty much anyone can remember. And walking into a cafe, a hotel, a pub, anywhere where there's normally 10s, 20, 30, 40, 50 people, it is sad, and they are struggling. And whilst JobKeeper has been good, and we know that people have rated JobKeeper, but at some stage, JobKeeper needs to tailor back, and businesses need to do their job, right? Which is grow, prosper, sell, trade. And, it's my belief that the role of the government, any government, is to create the healthy environment so our small and medium business, our engine room, can drive the nation. And at the moment, it's just not happening because we're getting treated like mugs. We're getting treated like the southeast corner. The Palaszczuk Labor government blaming everyone else except themselves, not listening to the health advice from a national level, and praising people that go and protest, but finding restaurants that have 21 people.
Yeah, I mean, everybody's talking about the success of the National Cabinet, and yes, it's achieved a lot up to now, but wait a minute. The idea of locking down borders was never on the list of the National Cabinet. That was never a National Cabinet decision. It's just unilateral by Queensland, right?
Exactly. I kind of, went a little bit to the side of the direction of the National Cabinet with the belief of regional management zones, similar to WA, where, you manage sort of what Victoria is doing now. You manage where you have outbreaks, where you have small clusters of COVID-19, not treating everyone the same, but then, concentrating your effort where there is a breakout, so then we can contain it, control it, get rid of it, then back to operations. For 70 days, we're going to push 3 months soon. People up here are sick of it. People up here want to get back to work. People up here want to live their lives and not be living in fear from the propaganda spat out by the Labor Party.
Phil, I'd like to talk a little bit about you, if I can, because you're not yet well known on the national stage. I'm sure you will be. You entered Parliament just over a year ago, as part of the Morrison miracle.
I did. I had, the PM, Scott. He's fantastic. He does such a great job. And I know you just asked about me, but I want to tell everyone a little bit about the PM because politicians. You can always give them a little bit, and I'll talk about anything. But the Prime Minister came up here 12 months ago in the midst of a flood. So we had a 1 in 500 year monsoon event. Our whole town pretty much flooded. People are still not in their homes. Businesses are still recovering from that, let alone the COVID-19 pandemic as well. But the PM came up. He came up at my request to meet with some people that were in shelters and doing it tough. He lands. He gets to his accommodation, and one of the people that were driving him and his staff around for the day rocked up him. Stubbies, torn shorts, thongs, ripped shirt. And this is not what normally happens, right? When people pick up the PM, they're dressed immaculately. And the PM asked, what's happening? How are you doing? And he's living in his roof because his house flooded and they had nowhere to go. So the PM paid for him and his family to stay at a hotel until things got sorted out. Now, the PM didn't do media on it. No one said anything about it. And when I saw this driver as I was going down to Parliament, he gave me a big hug and told me the story. This is the kind of person that our Prime Minister is. He's compassionate. He's a great bloke. And to do something like that was just, you can't even describe it.
Yeah, look, he's the real deal. Let's not bypass you because you're the real deal too, Phil. And you're a refreshing arrival, I think. You're not a professional politician. And because particularly on the Labor side, you have people in that Parliament who've done nothing else their whole lives. But tell us a bit about your background.
Sure. And, I'll promise I'll keep my tattoos covered up so I don't offend anyone from Labor that might jump in on tonight's webinar. But so I'm ex-Army. I served in Townsville with the 1st Battalion. I served in East Timor in Afghanistan. I was blown up in Afghanistan in 2009 by an improvised explosive device. I suffered a traumatic brain injury. I was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder. I still can't hear out of my right ear from the blast. And I worked in mental wellbeing and suicide prevention pretty much when I left Defence, when I was medically discharged. And I got into politics because I saw Townsville stagnant and our young people leaving. And as someone that is a father, but also looking around Townsville, I want to keep our young people here. I want to keep them engaged. I want to be a part of the change and create projects that create jobs and drives the economy. So, yeah, I'm using my experience and skill set, which is, as I was raised in the Defence as a digger, you have 2 ears and 1 mouth, and that's how you should use them. We should be listening to our people, and that's how we drive good policy. It's my belief within the veteran space and throughout now into the community is that we need to move away from telling people what they want and asking people what they need. And so that's why I'm in politics, and that's why I'm here.
Thanks Phil. And thanks for everything you're doing up there, and I'll be up there just as soon as we can. Miss Palaszczuk, tear down that wall. I think that's the line, isn't it? Thanks Phil. Phil Thompson, member for Herbert, joining us from Townsville, and staying in Queensland because next week is the week Queensland should be thriving. It should be out of lockdown. It should be allowing good people like ourselves to go up there and enjoy the sunshine and the hospitality, but they're not for some reason of self-flagellation. They know to the Premier those borders are staying closed next week. It's a crying shame. But joining me from Queensland now is somebody who'll be very familiar to a lot of you if you view Sky News. She's a regular contributor to Sky News and a great voice of common sense in the Parliament. Senator Amanda Stoker from Brisbane. Welcome, Senator.
Hi, Nick. How are you?
Look, I'm excellent. And it's great that we can talk to you. We can't actually travel up and meet one another. I've got some business colleagues that want to get across the border for some urgent business in Queensland next Tuesday, people in the mining industry. And they've been battling for more than a week to get a visa. Now, this is essential business. It's business that could benefit the Queensland economy. What's going on?
Well, the Premier is being very, very careful on the health front and ignoring her responsibilities on the economic front. Good leadership means taking into account both and managing the risks associated with each of those potential problems. And at the moment, she has just abdicated her responsibility to the Chief Medical Officer and ignored her economic responsibilities. It's a very short-term strategy because in the long term, we will all pay the price for our economy being shut down.
Yeah, this is the thing. It's one thing to be careful about health and have to take measures, but at some point we've got to take risks, right? Because the damage that's happening to our economy, and the longer this goes on, the faster that cost rises, the more it's going to be likely that some businesses go to the wall and won't come out again. It's just got beyond the pale, I think. You must feel that too, coming from Canberra and seeing the importance of actually having an economy thriving. That's quite important.
Yeah, that's right. And let's not beat around the bush. It will be almost a full year's worth of income lost for the tourism industry. It's one of the three biggest industries in Queensland. That is no small thing. And that's just one industry of many that is affected by these restrictions. There's a perverse impact of the way aspects of our federation's arrangements for funding the states operate here too, because all of the incentives line up to incentivise the Premier being extra cautious at the expense of the economy, because the poorer Queensland performs, the more help it gets from the federal government, the greater its share of GST. And that's something that we should all be concerned about and be willing to think about being a problem we try to solve for the long term, because perverse incentives in an economic sense, we try to remedy for a whole bunch of reasons. It doesn't bring out the best in people, doesn't bring out their best choices, and the same is true of governments.
That's right. And the people that are making some of these decisions are not the people that are affected by the economic effects, right? This is just as the virus is selected, so the effects on the economy are very selective. Some businesses are doing okay, some are even thriving, but some are doing it very hard.
That's right. And part of the difficulty here in Queensland is the Premier keeps shifting the goalposts. Initially, the goal was to flatten the curve. Well, the curve has been flattened. Then the goalpost shifted to eradication. But eradication is not a realistic goal. And what we intended at the outset to do in something of a meeting of minds of the federal and state governments was to allow sufficient time for our health systems, our equipment, our testing, our personnel to catch up and be ready for COVID infections as they arose, so that those people who experienced it were able to be treated well and not have significant damage to their bodies as a consequence of experiencing it. We have done that. We are ready. We have those measures in place. To now change the goalposts to something that is different entirely is a recipe for almost immeasurable economic harm, because we're very unlikely to ever reach the point of complete eradication without cutting Queensland off from the rest of the world.
Let's talk about some of the things that have changed, because a lot's changed. I mean, a lot has changed in the last 3-4 months. Is it only that long? It seems longer. But on the policy side of things, it now seems that a lot of the things that we've been thinking we needed to fix, to adjust policy, and it seemed so hard, a lot of these things seem very possible now. What's on your agenda? What do you think the top things are we should be looking at?
You know that old expression that says never waste a crisis? I think there is a momentum for important economic reform that comes from this time, as people appreciate that we no longer have the luxury of being in a stalemate, for instance, on industrial relations. We no longer have the luxury of just putting up with environmental regulations that make, that incentivise economic investment. We no longer have the luxury of excessive red tape, because we know that jobs depend on clearing it out of the way. So I've made it my mission to identify those aspects of regulation at a federal level that truly aren't necessary, or that could be reworked in a way that shifts the mindset of our public service decision makers from no to yes, because we need to do everything we can to make it as inexpensive to get quality projects off the ground as fast as possible. We need to make it as accessible as possible for small businesses to take a chance on a new staff member. We need to make it as inexpensive as possible for Australian manufacturers to access the international market. And so that has been a ripe opportunity for my rather nerdy policy brain to get amongst some of the detail of legislation and provide some help to ministers in their, I think, really fundamental task of simplifying and streamlining the way that Australians and their businesses engage with government.
Yeah, look, of course, the federal government can and is doing a lot in that area, but in the end, it's got to be at all three levels of government, right? State government and local government. I mean, for instance, if we want to use home building and home renovation as a way to kickstart the economy, then local government's going to have to lift its game with planning regulations.
Yes, that's true. One of the things that I've been thinking about is that the success during the crisis of the National Cabinet model highlights one of the strengths of the Federation, and that is the ability of the states and the Commonwealth to hold one another accountable for their strengths and their weaknesses. To work together where appropriate, sure, but also to drive each other towards better outcomes. I don't see why we couldn't leverage that same opportunity to encourage state and federal governments to be watching each other in their levels of regulation and the ease or complexity of the regulations they have on business and individuals as they make economic decisions, and use that to hold one another accountable for the ways that they are going about making Australia the most attractive place in the world to do business. If we adopt that attitude, and if we harness the Federation and competitive federalism for that aim, I think we could come out of this time having done some of the most important reforms that are necessary to set us up for the next decade.
Oh, it's definitely, there's a sense of tremendous opportunity here, and let's hope we seize it. One other thing that I think has changed during this crisis is the left, if you like, the progressive left. I thought that they might come out of this sort of, with a bit of sense knocked into them, knowing we had to create jobs for people. But no, it seems to me with the campaigns, the Black Lives Matter campaign and its successes, and particularly this cancel culture thing, which has just taken hold, we're just in a whole new ballpark, aren't we, in dealing with these, with the intelligentsia, as I like to call them, or the people who appear on the ABC.
Look, I had shared your hope that the emergence of a real crisis might have helped those who have been some of the left's most extreme cultural warriors to understand that, for instance, earning a living isn't a bad thing, or being a business owner, which means you're employing other people, is in many ways a service. You're not a bad guy. I had hoped that there would be some sense, as you say, knocked into many of these people, but it really was just a pause. And the moment that it was, I guess, within tone for them to do so, they were back with a vengeance. But this cancel culture idea that those on the hard left are so fond of is really toxic. Cancel culture divides us in a way that is just so unhealthy. If we demand that every individual have a view, for instance, on a statue of Winston Churchill and decide whether or not he is a saviour of the Western world or a terrible racist, and that there's no room for understanding the shades of grey in between, we not only deny ourselves the lessons of history and the opportunity to apply them into the future, but we divide ourselves. We retreat into silos or bubbles of people who think the same. We harshly judge those who think differently, and we lose our ability to empathise with one another, to understand different points of view, and that is the essence of a tolerant society. So for all of the left's bleating about the need for tolerance, true tolerance involves the ability to hear history, stories, ideas and be able to respectfully engage with one another nonetheless. And cancel culture is the antithesis of that.
Yeah, Amanda, I had a long interview with the author Lionel Shriver, the novelist Lionel Shriver, which is available on podcast. You can get it by going to iTunes, on Menzies Research Centre podcast. Some of the things she said really chilled me. She as an author, of course, has been in the forefront of this. She's been accused of racism and so forth, as anybody who doesn't toe the line 100% often is. But her point was that now she feels when she's approaching people, particularly from different ethnic or cultural backgrounds, she's nervous. She doesn't want to say anything. She sort of shrinks into herself for fear of doing something wrong. And of course, the result of that is that normal human interaction and communication breaks down. It goes to your point. This is destructive, isn't it?
And it's more really than just cancel culture dividing us, although that is true. Cancel culture makes us less free, because if we're not free to speak with one another, knowing we will be heard, tolerated nonetheless, we start to self-censor. We start to have a restricted ability to speak our minds. And if we aren't allowed to speak freely, we're not far away from losing our freedom of thought too. Lose that, and we aren't just less free as individuals, but we rob our society of the ability to critically engage, to problem solve, to innovate. And that means we suffer economically. So it's the trifecta of badness. We are divided as a people by cancel culture. We are poorer as a result of cancel culture. And free. It might be well-intentioned by some on the naive side, but this is bad stuff. And we need to do everything we can to help common sense people push against it.
Yeah, let's cancel culture. That's my motto for the week. Look, Amanda, thank you so much for joining us. I'd love to talk to you more. We've got to move on. We've got a lot to pack in, but we'd love to have you back on Watercooler Live soon, perhaps even here live, as it were, not down on a video call. But thank you for everything you're doing in Queensland.
Appreciate the opportunity. Have a good one.
Thank you. Yeah, you're watching Watercooler Live. This is the weekly webcast of the Menzies Research Centre, episode 12, and the first one we've done from outside the studio. We're here in New South Wales Central Coast in the town of Ettalong, here in the Bill Leak Gallery. So let's take a look around the gallery. And Fred Paul, mate, good to see you, mate. Well, there we are. We've done it on television. Everybody's seen us. Fred, you're engaged in a very important project at the moment, writing the biography of Bill Leak. Tell me how it's going.
Well, it's become more important as every day goes by. I mean, you were just talking about cancel culture. I can actually put that in the context that Bill saw it in. As a young man in the late 70s, Bill went to Europe to absorb what he could from the great masters. And he wrote home to his parents one time and said that he thought European culture was too constrained by tradition. And the country that was primed to become the next sort of, artistic and cultural emerging force was Australia. And one of the reasons was, apart from being a relatively young country since settlement, was that the great Australian culture of calling bullshit where we see it. And the shame about cancel culture is that we are cancelling out people who call bullshit. And that's what Bill did. Everything Bill did in the end, he was just saying, look, there's something wrong here. This is my take on it. And he was mercilessly vilified for it. And that's just not Australian. And I think what we're squandering is what Bill saw back in the late 70s. Australia could be an amazingly thriving and vivacious and humorous and gregarious country, but we're suppressing that part of our culture, and I think that's an absolute tragedy.
I mean, go back a decade, and I remember having this conversation with Bill more than once. I envied the fact that he could make a really tough point, but because he did it in a cartoon with humour, he could get away with it. Whereas if you wrote it in a newspaper article,
you'd be sued.
You'd be sued, right? I don't know anybody who's been sued around here, but anyway, but that changed. It changed. It changed at the point where he could no longer draw what he wanted to draw.
Well, one of the disadvantages of a cartoon is that it's such a neat depiction of someone's opinion that it's easily emailable. And all you have to do is look at it. It pops up on Facebook and suddenly everyone's got an opinion. If you wrote the same thing, if you made the same argument in 800 words, no one would read it. I mean, certainly not, millennials who are the main, population of most of these mobs who go after the unacceptable opinions.
Let's go to Bill and his politics. I mean, a lot of people, particularly on the left, say, well, he changed. He was a good... Mate. We'll see some of his cartoons later. In fact,
I've just dug up his first ever daily cartoons, which he did for the Financial Review in 1992. I've just spent a couple of days in the library looking for them, and finally found them. And I'm absolutely amazed at how even-handed he was, even back then. He was a lefty back then, but the ridicule he was giving to Keating back in 92 was the same he gave to Howard in 98. And you can see it here. I mean, this exhibition is called The Good, the Bad and the Ugly. There's something good, bad and ugly in every one of these portraits. And that's what Bill was. He saw good and bad in everyone. And I think that's what made him such a genius.
Yeah, well, let's just talk about, the marker for me is how he draws John Howard. So he's an early, I guess, I'd say 97, 98, I'd say, because of the Pauline Hanson in there. It's a great cartoon, isn't it? Really good. Pauline looks fantastic.
Yeah, but he drew Pauline a few times as quite a vixen, like that. She's quite evil there, and obviously to take out the Prime Minister, and is a monster. But there were other times when she was quite, attractive.
Yeah.
And, that was Bill. He just whatever the gag was, he was onto it. He
was.
Yeah.
Oh, that is a beauty, but it does go to that early John Howard. I don't think he liked him very much, always very small in the frame.
No, but compared to this one, I mean,
let's bring Johannes come over here. Talk us through the progression of Bill's depictions of John Howard.
Well, clearly, when Howard got in, Bill was furious. Bill really did not like the Howard government in 96 when they were elected. He was outraged that what he saw as a bunch of authoritarian, dictatorial, working class smashing politicians had got into Canberra. Obviously his opinion changed over the years, but you can see it there. That's a humiliating little situation for Howard, but later on he looks...
Hannes, I mean, this is what, about 2002, thereabouts, we think?
Yes, I would say that's about right, yeah.
I think he's growing in Bill's estimation. I mean, he still makes him little Johnny, right?
He's still got a fair bit of paper to make up there at the top of the page, but yeah, I mean, the aspect is almost, it's quite reverential, really, that one, isn't it?
Yeah, and I can see this one's sold already. It's got the red sticker on.
Yes, indeed, that's sold, yes.
Yeah, Fred, tell me about that story. I think it's fairly well known, so I'm not pinching anything from your book. Tell me if it's an exclusive to your book, but after John Howard left politics and Bill got to meet him, tell me about that encounter between Bill and Mr. Howard.
Well, it was at the Concilium, I think it was. They just actually became really good friends. Another good friend of Bill's, asked him, Warren Brown, the cartoonist for the Telegraph, asked him, well, what do you think about John Howard these days? And Bill, without hesitating, just said, he's a great man. So in the end, he actually got to, respect these people. I was at a function once where Philip Ruddock turned up, and Bill went and shook Ruddock's hand and said, listen, mate, Ruddock said, I've been admiring your work in the paper these days, Bill. And he said, well, thank you very much, but there's something I need to tell you, Philip. And Philip said, what was that? And he goes, I think I need to apologise to you for going a bit far a couple of times. And that was Bill. I don't think he turned his politics, but he just became a little bit gentler in his old.
Well, he did go. I don't think we haven't got any Ruddock here, I don't think, which is probably just as well. That would be the ugly.
Yes, that's right. There's plenty of them though. But apparently, Philip Ruddock actually bought quite a few of those for his own personal collections. So,
hide them away so nobody saw them.
Well, apparently not.
Talk me through a few of these. Talking about the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Indeed.
This one is ugly, right?
Yeah. I mean, I just think it's kind of, for me, the consummate caricature portrait. Dad is able to do what caricaturists do best, and that is, emphasize and overstate and exaggerate somebody's features. But in doing so, I mean, some people just do that and you get a funny face with big ears and a big nose. Dad somehow, through this process, gives you a window into these people's souls and what makes them tick. So, he approached everything with the eye of a portrait painter, but penetrating caricatures.
It's a good point. I think a bad cartoon, everybody can do exaggerated pictures, the big nose or whatever, but it has to mean something, right?
Yeah,
Like
exactly.
anybody can do, Tony Abbott in Budget Smugglers, as I think one particular cartoonist did every day for 5 years.
That's
but,
right, yeah.
I mean, they have to say something, and they're here again, I think. You've got, you can see in Locked on Murdoch and James Packer, and who's this down the bottom? It's not Malcolm Turnbull, is it?
This is Cameron O'Reilly.
Oh, right.
Cameron O'Reilly. But yes, I think from memory that this was an illustration accompanying a story about these young heirs to media empires. And it is interesting because it's got November 96 written on it. So that's, 24 years ago. And we all know where these people have ended up now, but it captures that time when they were the fresh new young faces, the young go-getters. Who knows where they would go? That there's that feeling there.
He's got Lachlan. I remember it would have been that period, almost running into Lachlan. He was doing sprinting up the firewell, and he had exactly those always the rolled up sleeves.
That's right.
This one over here, unmistakable. I see you sold that today.
Yes, indeed.
We won't say who you sold it to. But look, Alexander Dana. Alexander was a favourite one of his, wasn't he?
Oh, he sure was.
Why?
Yeah. Oh, I think he's a caricature before he even put pen to paper in some ways. I mean, his mannerisms. I think his general appearance was something that Dad latched onto. Dad loved the curly hair, sort of bulbous features, and of course, Dad almost always drew him in a pair of fishnet stockings, which in this case he actually hasn't, because there's
probably the only one. I think his feet are under the desk.
That's right. Yeah, indeed.
It is a beautiful. Anyway, we could talk for hours, and the Three Musketeers. Oh, you've got to love that one.
That's right.
But this era, you're the cartoonist. In this era, everything was painted, right?
Well, yes. I mean, we're not using paint here, but this is a combination of ink, airbrush, acetate. They all start with a drawing in graphite, and then the process actually involves two surfaces. There's a paper surface, which is where the colours usually go, and then acetate layer, clear acetate over the top, which is where the blacks, the inks go, which then tie all the line work and tie the image together. But yeah, look, with this show here, I just thought I'd love to get the ball rolling, as it were, with this gallery, with a broad sort of sweep, a broad cross-section of Australian household names, make sure there's something for everybody here. I've got politicians and heavyweights in the media and the corporate world here. Over here, you've got different, different walks of life, different characters from different sort of, from different worlds, but they're all great Aussies that we know and remember, and overwhelmingly that's been the response from people who have made it along to see the place. They all comment that this brings back a lot of memories Australian
Fred,
cultural life.
Yeah, Fred, there's some stories here. If we can get a camera on them, I don't know, but the two pictures here.
Yeah, Brett Whiteley was a huge inspiration to Bill. In fact, when Bill came back from Germany in 1981, he arranged to meet Brett Whiteley, and Brett Whiteley organised for Bill to get his first few exhibitions and so on. But people have told me that Bill wanted to be the next Brett Whiteley. And to be honest, I'm glad he wasn't, because Brett Whiteley was just too self-absorbed and too idiosyncratic, and I don't think his art was as good as Bill's anyway. Bill's disadvantage in those days was that he was actually quite conservative as an artist and too realist, and so his art didn't capture the market back in the 80s, which was all nouveau riche and was all about money back then. So, this is kind of a flattering picture of Brett Whiteley, I guess, but there's probably a little bit of psychological warfare going on there, to be honest, that, that was the guy that Bill once wanted to be, and I think he wound up being having a better career anyway. He certainly lived longer.
Yeah. Oh, they're fantastic. And Hannes, you now, we've got a camera over here. We've got cameras all over the place.
Sure.
What was I going to say? Yeah, now you've been doing daily cartoons yourself, right?
Yes.
Which is a new thing. 5 days a week?
Yes, 5 days a week.
For the Australian, we love them. Thank goodness for you. But you now discovering something that your dad must have gone through, that constant having to come up, not only have a good idea, but it's got to be funny.
Yeah.
And then you've got to sit and draw the thing, right? And they're not easy.
No, that's exactly right. I mean, I am literally doing the same job that Dad had. It's the 5 days a week daily editorial job. And so I am, every day I go through the same sequence that he would go through, reading, absorbing, scratching my head a lot, nutting out what it is I'm going to be putting together in a cartoon. I always thought that what attracted Dad to it and what kept him so invigorated and excited about the process was the fact that it is, for somebody like Dad and for somebody like me, I think it's the complete challenge. In the one day, there's a conceptual aspect to it. There's an opinion aspect. That you have to show that you understand the material to some sort of significant depth, and then you have to sum that up in a drawing. And so I can't think, for me personally, that's a big enough challenge for me to try and take on every day. And I think Dad felt so.
Yeah, just one more very quickly while we're here. I don't know whether we can get a camera on it, possibly not. But anyway, Alan Jones, we'll show that next time. Look,
Sure.
One of the things you of course, these are the portraits or illustrations that Bill would do. We've got on the wall here, but of course his cartoons, what he was most famous for. You've got a pile of them here.
Yes, I've got a little pile.
Yeah, what have you got there? I love this. I'm allowed to take the cover off.
Of course.
Yeah.
There you go.
There, look at that. Let's look at that one. Looks like Tony Abbott there in a skirt. Oh my goodness. Abortion A, I've put you back on the waiting list. Come back and see me in 9 months. I think that must have been Tony's health minister days.
That's right.
It just so happens that we have a special guest with us tonight on the line from Warringah, I guess. Tony, are you there?
Here, if you can hear me.
I can. You're 28th Prime Minister of Australia, Tony Abbott. Tony, I don't know whether you may not be getting the same picture we're getting here. You may not have seen that picture, but it's, as you can imagine, a very flattering picture of you by Bill. Tell me, what was it like? I think you were amongst his favourites at one stage. When you pick up the paper in the morning, you'd see a Bill Leake cartoon of you. Would you sort of shrink under the table? Or would you feel rather proud of it?
I think to be noticed by Bill Leake was to have made it in some important sense, Nick. So I was never worried by any of Bill's cartoons. They were very pointed, often enough. Mostly they were funny. And even though in those days Bill was probably much more of a critic than a friend, by the same token, there was always a charm to him. So to be drawn by Bill Leake, even caricatured by Bill Leake, was something of an honour.
And I'm right, Andre, in those days, you know, when you were in the ministry, in the Howard ministry, nobody would dream of ringing up to complain about their cartoon. It would just be a humorless thing to do, right?
Well, look, I think it was true that back then, while political debates were fierce, there wasn't as much questioning of people's good faith as there has been in more recent times. There were lots of big arguments in those days between the left and the right, but I think there was less moralising. Certainly, it was possible on the left to have respect for people on the right and vice versa. It has become a lot more savage since then, and the attacks on Bill Leak in his last few years, particularly over the celebrated cartoon about the Indigenous dad and the Indigenous policeman and the child, that provoked amongst some people a rage against Bill Leak, which was entirely unfair, absolutely and utterly unfair.
I think you can see, can't you, in those final years of Bill, you can just see the oppression closing in our culture, the cancel culture. We didn't call it that then, but it was there, wasn't it? The left not only wanted to disagree, they wanted to shut him down.
Well, that's right. And of course, after Bill was taken from us prematurely, there were lots of people jumping onto social media saying things like, "I'm glad he's dead." Well, I mean, agree with Bill Leak or disagree with Bill Leak, but the guy was a remarkable talent. He was a wonderful artist, a brilliant portraitist, as well as being an extraordinarily acute chronicler in pictures of our major debates. Now, as I say, share his perspective or not, this was a bloke who brought insights to our national life, which were rare, and we should be grateful for it.
We talk about this development, and it seems to have come on very suddenly with the Black Lives Matter movement, but perhaps it's been going on longer, that now everybody who doesn't agree with people on the progressive left risks being condemned as a racist. They'll find some reason to make you racist. And in doing so, I think it seems to me they're increasing the divisions and distrust between people of different cultures in our country and elsewhere, not bringing us together.
Well, they're encouraging people on the left, at least, to dig a trench and occupy that trench and never to venture out to see if there isn't at least some common ground with other people. And they're leaving a much more fractured society. Now, plainly, if we're talking about Black Lives Matter, the treatment of George Floyd was utterly abominable. And the policeman who was guilty of what looks like a despicable act, he's been charged with murder, as he should be, and his colleagues have been charged as accomplices of some sort. It is interesting, though, that it was a multiracial squad that stood by while this abominable act was perpetrated. Now, of course, Black Lives Matter, but really all lives matter. And yet I gather if you say all lives matter, you're liable to be sacked from newspapers in the United States. Well, really, plainly all lives do matter. And it's precisely because all lives matter that Black Lives Matter. Otherwise, we're basically back to the old days where there are superior and inferior individuals. It's just that we've inverted the old order. Well, if the old racism was bad, surely any recurrence of racism, even if the boot's on the other foot, is equally bad.
Yeah. Let's talk about Aboriginal welfare for a moment. It's something you've devoted much of your political career to. So it seems to me if Black Lives Matter, and they do, then we should be very concerned that the life expectancy for an Indigenous man in a remote community is 66, and the life expectancy for you and I is probably more like 81, 82. Now, that's 16 years of black lives, which is lost. And we know the reasons, health largely, unemployment, the effect of welfare, long-term welfare, just living in those remote conditions. Shouldn't we get more energised about this? I mean, if we really are concerned about Aboriginal welfare?
Well, there's a sense in which the people who should be most energised about it are the individuals in that predicament. And yes, all of us should be concerned. And all of us have got to do what we can. But I suppose if you're unemployed, if you're living in public housing, if you've got substance issues, there are going to be health consequences to that. And one way or another, all of us have got to do what we can to try to change the factors that are bringing about this chronic disparity in life expectancy. So we've all got to do more. And Indigenous people need to do more. All of us need to do more. Government, citizens, we all need to do more. It's not white fellas' fault that this is happening. It's not black fellas' fault that this is happening. All of us, in a sense, have got to lift our game.
And it doesn't help, it seems to me, whatever the past in Australia, and there were terrible things happened, of course, as on the frontier in particular. It doesn't seem to be very helpful if to blame those things, say, back in the middle of the 19th century for the plight of Indigenous people now. It turns fatalistic, doesn't it? I can't do anything to improve because I'm a victim of colonialism.
Yeah. And look, one of the reasons why, Nick, I've always been such a big fan of Noel Pearson is because Noel Pearson has said time and time again that we've got to take responsibility. Our right, he said to his own people, our right to take responsibility. And that's the thing. Everyone has a right, indeed a duty, to take responsibility as far as is humanly possible for his or her own life and to change the things that are within our control to make our lives better. Now, I absolutely accept that there are some things that are out of our control. I absolutely accept that there are some factors that are difficult to change, but what we can change for the better, we should. And I think that was probably Bill Leake's view at the end of his life. Certainly, I think that was the kind of attitude that was animating that celebrated cartoon, which caused so much controversy at the time. And I think we owe it to the memory of people like Bill Leake. We owe it to the memory of all good people to try to be our best, to do our best, and to urge everyone to be their best.
Let me throw an unscripted curly one at you, Tony, if I may. Every Prime Minister, you're the 28th Prime Minister, one of the things that traditionally occurs is you have an official portrait drawn or painted, and that appears in Parliament House. And one of my favourites there is Bob Hawke's portrait, which of course was done by Bill Leake. It just stands out head and shoulders above the rest. I remember, without giving away too many secrets, I think your view was that you shouldn't have a portrait done until you'd left Parliament. You have left Parliament now. What are your thoughts? Have you thought about this?
Look, and if Bill was still around, I would certainly have been knocking on his door. It's probably premature to make an announcement as to who I would like to do that, because I suspect I'd have to have a chat to the people who commission the work first. But I do have a name in mind, and I might be making a phone call soon.
Good. Well, we look forward to that. We look forward to you taking your rightful place there, next to Julia Gillard.
Well, you look too much older than you did when you were PM. But then someone else said to me the other day that you look so much younger now than you did when you were PM. So maybe if I wait another 10 years,
You
and
do
the stress lines have further dissipated.
Yeah, you're looking frighteningly fit. You've got polypedal coming up, I think, later in the year. You're looking ready for that. So, yeah, I look forward to sort of trailing in your wake.
Trailing in Angus Taylor's wake, but it is something to look forward to.
Yeah, indeed. Look, Tony, thank you very much for joining us again on Watercooler Live, and we look forward to your contribution again soon. Thank you. The Bill Leak Gallery, where we are, Watercooler Live from the Bill Leak Gallery in Ettalong on the New South Wales Central Coast. Let's go and find our host, Johannes Fred, come over here. So you guys, Johannes, this should be open to visitors.
Yes, it is.
It is open.
Yes,
That's fantastic.
We're open from Thursday through to Sundays, generally from about midday till 4. Saturdays an hour earlier. We're open from 11 till 4 on a Saturday, and it's just been terrific. We've been open through the month of June so far, and I've just met so many terrific people that followed Dad's career closely, just really understood him through his work on a level that actually blows me away every time I meet them. I mean, they're so passionate. I think because they rode those last few years with him, along with a lot of Australians did, they're really quite devoted admirers and fans. And so when I put this whole gallery idea together, I thought, I hope they're out there, these people. And I think they are.
Well, we've got two of them here tonight.
That's right.
I'm going to embarrass them. Bob and Jan Partington, great supporters of the Menzies Research Centre. Thanks for coming along. And I think Bill does inspire that sort of, he became, and I don't know if he really sought the role, maybe Fred will tell us this, he didn't ever really seek the role of martyr, did he?
No, he didn't. No. The great conundrum of Bill's life, I think, was that he really... There was a lot of sensitivity and tenderness about Bill, despite his bravado and his kind of aggressive personality. And really, deep down, one of Bill's sort of drives was he just really, really wanted to be liked. But how can you be if you are so uncompromising when you pursue the truth, and especially in cartoons? And in the end, his pursuit of the truth kind of prevailed, much to his great expense. But yeah, you're right. Bill wanted to be liked. I mean, he was the most gregarious person you could ever meet. And when he dominated a room, he didn't dominate it because he thought he was the most charismatic person in the room. He just wanted to meet everyone. That's the kind of guy he was, and he understood people. I think that's what that's what made him a great portraitist and a great commentator.
We should just say, why Ettalong? I mean, Bill came to settle quite near to here, didn't he? At a difficult time in his life.
Well, but also some of the most wonderful years of his life. Actually, the sort of that last 10 to 15 years was when he came up and lived and moved from Sydney up to the Central Coast. He lived very close by, just over the water from here, and yeah, I mean, those were the years that he met Gung and married Gung, and so there were some really special years. I mean, they were turbulent for sure, especially the last few years. But Dad fell in love with the Central Coast in a big way, and I live down the road. I thought it makes sense to be here because you can kind of build something here, and it's special in Ettalong.
And it was a kind of a homecoming for him, really, wasn't it? I mean, he grew up in the country, and then in a kind of an emerging middle class suburb in the northern beaches of Sydney. And then he spent his whole career kind of immersed among the intelligentsia and the powerful, and mixing with the the most influential people. But it wasn't until he actually left all that behind and came back here that he really found happiness again.
Yeah, I think that played a big role in it for sure. I mean,
difficult years. I mean, he had that terrible accident where we thought we were going to lose him.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, no, it was. You're right, actually. That in the early part there was definitely some adjustment. I mean, that story you mentioned is that was really a very touch and go period. But there was some adjustment, but then it led to some of the happiest years of his life in those later years. So yeah, look, I think the Central Coast is lucky to have Bill Leake as a sort of later resident, and so it's lovely to be able to put this here. And
because he didn't just fall in love with the Central Coast, did he? He went to a Thai restaurant here in Woi Woi.
That's right.
And fell in love with Gung.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. Well, he wasn't a great chef himself. So.
I remember going round his place. The freezer would be stuffed with Thai red curries. He was living off them.
It was a great relationship.
It was a great period, and you know that final night with when he launched his book, and he had Barry Humphries there as it was a terrific night.
Well, you know, I mean, it sounds a little melodramatic, but that night I've never seen him happier.
No,
you know,
I'd go along with
for
that.
a long time, and that was as happy as I've ever seen.
I was emceeing that night.
Well, you were emceeing, of course, one of his mates. You know, he was launching a fantastic book, but he and Gung were partners in putting that whole thing on. Gung catered it, and Bill was the guest of honour in launching his book, and of course, you know, Sir Les Patterson just happened to turn
Sir
up.
Les, yeah.
I mean, what more could a man want?
And he looks even more like Sir Les.
I hope he turns up to my
stains on his. Make sure he does. And I make sure he embarrasses you too.
Yeah.
We should give a shout out to Greg Lindsay and Tom at the CIS for hosting that
For
night.
hosting
that was great.
Yeah. And to the IPA for promoting this current book.
Well, let's do that now. So, Fred, you gave us 3 great years at the Menzies Research Centre.
Thank you.
Thank you for everything you did. We had our rough moments, we had our fun moments, but you definitely improved so much we were doing out of sight. You know, the communications with people and that website, and Watercooler was your idea, I think.
That's right. Yeah, I put out 187 of them, I think, if I'm not mistaken. 187 Friday nights. I went. But anyway, that's
and now it's a brand, so we're Watercooler Live.
Yes, now we're on Watercooler.
Thank you for that. Now, tell me, let's pay tribute to the IPA and John Roscombe. It's thanks to them that you're being able to go off and spend full time writing on this book now.
Indeed, when John did not hesitate for a millisecond to back this project, and has backed it significantly, so it can be done properly. Now we're running to a pretty tight schedule because we want to launch it on the 10th of March next year, which will be the 4th anniversary of Bill's death. And I think it's really pertinent. You know, like 4 years is a pretty good time for the dust to settle, for everyone to form their opinions, and for his biographer, which is luckily me. I got to say, I have to express my gratitude, firstly to the MRC for the past 3 years, but also to the Leake family and all his closest friends for allowing me to be his biographer, because I mean, there would be a dozen people in Australia who could write this book brilliantly, and I just feel very lucky to be the one who's doing it. So.
Oh, you're doing so. And we won't give away the secrets, but you've gone right back to his childhood, his teenage, and his early 20s. And one of the things about your dad that must make it easy for Fred, not that it's an easy task, is that he wasn't just a great cartoonist drawer. He was a fantastic writer too, and he wrote a lot, didn't he? So a lot committed to paper.
Yeah, absolutely. Letters, diaries. I mean, we haven't even gotten to emails yet, but I mean, he was just constantly writing, tapping away, and communicating with people. So, I mean, there's so much to dig into, and look, and also just everybody that he met remembers a story or something, and so talk to enough people, and you just the picture sort of comes together.
There must be a problem. I mean, there's almost too much.
What do you leave out? That's exactly true. I mean, there's stuff I'm digging up now that I didn't know existed. Is there's so much gold there. Bill lived 10 lives. There were so many aspects to him. I mean, most of what I've focused on so far has to do with his devotion to art and his devotion to Picasso and Velázquez and Goya and so on. And they influenced him, quite profoundly, and that stayed with him through life. One of the big differences he has with most artists, though, as we were saying a second ago, is that he was so verbally articulate. I mean, Picasso didn't actually trust words that much. He didn't I don't think he liked talking too much. He just let his pictures do the talking. Bill was never happy for his pictures to do the talking. He always had opinions that couldn't be expressed in art, and so he had to do them verbally anyway.
Yeah, I think if he hadn't have been so much of a free thinker, so much of an independent thinker, I think he would have received far greater acknowledgement from the intelligentsia than he had, but they've been content to ignore him just because he didn't conform to their viewpoints.
I think that's a pretty good assessment and a sad one, really, but I think it's spot on. Yeah.
Well, we've got quite a bit of Bill Leak surviving in your daily cartoons. Thank you, Johannes, for everything you do. Fred, look, thanks for that book. It's very important.
Yes,
So what a great tribute to a great man who we all miss very dearly. But yeah, we should come back here. Can we come back here?
Anytime. We're not going anywhere.
We'll pack out the house. We'll bring beer next time. We'll bring beer.
Beautiful.
Look, thank you to everybody. We've gone on a bit, but I just wanted to keep this conversation going. Thank you to Jan and Bob for coming up, to Gung for coming along to say hello. Thank you to our director tonight, who I think would rather be behind the scenes. And to Luke Fields, our cameraman. Luke, thanks for coming up and doing such a fantastic job. We'd love to get you bringing your professional touch to Watercooler Live again soon. But thank you to you all. I hope you found us on the new YouTube channel. We'll be here again next week. We're pushing the YouTube channel now. This is where more people can see us. So please click on the link this time next week and we'll bring you another Watercooler Live. But from Fred, me, Johannes, everybody here on Watercooler Live, thank you for watching. Thanks, guys. These are really good, aren't they? They're fantastic. Really good. Yeah. There we go.